Good evening. I'm Karen Taylor. I am Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, and I'm here with our Executive Director, Victoria Dangle. We are delighted that you could all be here this evening. This includes both our in-person and indeed our online audience for a special talk this evening featuring the preeminent architect, Peter Pennoyer. Peter will be discussing his new book, From City to Country, an inside look at new projects, which of course is part of the Labour, Literature and Landmark lecture series. And I do want to point out to you this absolutely gorgeous book that will be for sale this evening and is also available online through Rizzoli. Now to say a few words is Victoria Dangle, our Executive Director.
Good evening, and just to take a couple of minutes, because tonight is a big night. It was an unplanned night, but it couldn't be a more perfect night because we have just concluded a 16-month restoration of our beautiful historic library skylight. And it's remarkable because the date kept changing for when this would happen, and then we couldn't believe that it couldn't be more right to have Peter with us. So Peter, thank you. And Peter's going to tell you more about his General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen connection. And we are very happy that our friends from the Landmarks Conservancy are also here, as well as our friends from the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. So good to have everyone with us. I just want to briefly say thank you. And again, keep glimpsing, but look more at Peter, of course, but continue to look at that. It's hypnotic, quite frankly, but I just wanted to say, and I can't possibly cover this tonight, but I did want to acknowledge Easton Architects and Lisa Easton and lead architect Tamara Talbert, who is they're in our company tonight. I also want to thank Nova Construction, homage to the craftsmen who executed the vision in only a way that the tradesmen can do. To Aurora Lampworks, oh my goodness, these pendant lights that in a pure serendipity, how they ended up in our hands, but it all started with Dawn's lecture 11 years ago. And interestingly enough, Dawn Ladd and Aurora Lampworks first got started when Dawn spied a lampshade in Harrods, a mauve lampshade with an 8-inch fringe that spawned her career. So just goes to show you what a moment can do. And I also want to thank my General Society brothers and sisters, and in particular, 1903 member Andrew Carnegie, who gave us $250,000 in 1903 and suggested we build a library and put 2 floors on top of the building. And I can honestly say that I think of him just about every day, because he was a true visionary, and that money would be $9 million today. And to our board, who is so supportive of the work of our mission at the General Society, I love you dearly. And with gratitude to the men who built this strong structure in 1903, who I have to say, in the end, saved us a lot of time and money because they built it right. And I hope that people stand in this room 100 years from now and say, they did a good job, so thank you.
Peter Pennoyer is the founding partner of Peter Pennoyer Architects, a New York-based architecture and design firm with an office in Miami. A fellow of the American Institute of Architects, he is co-author with Anne Walker of 5 books on early 20th century American architecture, and the author of A House in the Country, written with his wife, interior designer Katie Ritter. Recent projects include A House for the Jeff Koons Family, an Art Deco style apartment building on Madison Avenue, and Rowdy Meadow, an award-winning Czech Cubism style house in Ohio. It is such a great pleasure to introduce to you Peter Pennoyer.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Victoria. I'm very happy to be here. I have to say, I really feel at home here. My first time in this room, and it looks more like it with the skylight fix, was in March of 1975. I was an intern at the New York City Landmarks Commission, and they sent me up here to look at trade catalogs of cast iron facades. That was really lovely. And then 2 years ago, you called me and let me know that I wasn't the first Pennoyer to be a member, but that you found an Ezekiel Pennoyer, who was a carpenter in 1830-something. So it's really great to be here. So I'm going to give you an overview of some of the projects. I won't tell you everything because, of course, I want you to buy the book. But before delving into the book, I'm going to show you some of the more unusual projects that kept me and my partners, and my partner Tom Nugent is here tonight, busy since our last book in 2011. We think that as architects and as New Yorkers, we should weigh in when zoning or preservation issues capture the imagination and sometimes the indignation of the public. We like to offer solutions rather than join the protest, the chorus of no's. In 2012, the New York Public Library hired Lord Norman Foster's firm to create a lending library in the Maine branch in place of the brilliant cast iron stacks. Writers and scholars were upset that the books would be shifted off to New Jersey and that they wouldn't be able to imagine writing in the way they had before then. Fans of the library's architecture and scholars complained that Foster's stark modernism had no place in the Carrera and Hastings masterpiece. This section from Fifth Avenue on the right through the center of our building is our counter proposal, which expands the stacks and places the new lending library under Bryant Park. We also invited other architects to add their proposals. We set up a website and we thought we'd be accumulating other ideas about how the problem, and they did have a problem, could be solved. This is our reading room, our imaginary reading room, tucked under the West Terrace. It wouldn't actually have hurt any trees. Just as light reaches the concourse at Grand Central, which is actually 18 feet below grade, this would have been lit from light shafts tucked behind the balustrades at the edges of that terrace. We weren't hired, but our voice, among many others, caused the board to shelve the Foster plan. The stacks survive. By the way, I told one trustee that there are a few people with means in New York with egos big enough to want to claim naming rights, and the statue was waiting to be named. There are several New Yorkers actually who wanted this to go through as a project, but as I say, it hasn't happened yet, but the stacks remain for the future. We've also spent time designing smaller things. Our late, much admired client, Asa Tavidian, called and asked if I would design a table. Well, we needed some work, we're architects. And then he said, not the whole table, but just the legs. He'd acquired a Renaissance Pietro Dura tabletop, an extraordinary object of artisanship and craft. You can see a similar piece in the European Gallery at the Metropolitan. Of course, I said, Asa will design a table for you. So here's the corner of our table, inspired by visit to the storage halls of the Hermitage by our then associate Anton Gleichen. The final design was carved in France, then cast in bronze and assembled in Hoboken. And by the way, that wasn't the smallest object we designed. We also had a client whose rabbi insisted that she have 37 mezuzah in her house. And so we went online and saw nothing that looked too beautiful. So we designed a mezuzah, which is semi-mortised. And I knew I was onto something when Tablet magazine ran a story entitled "The Episcopalian Architect Who Designs Mezuzah." Sorry. We've also designed 2 apartment houses on the Upper East Side, and we just completed last week design development on a 3rd on 72nd Street. We worked hard to make our buildings respect the streets and the nearby historic architecture. This was adjacent to some lovely small brick houses called the Gimbel houses on 78th Street. And the base of our building, if you're ever over there, relates to the scale of the side street, but also to the scale of Lexington Avenue. And we're thrilled to work with the great artisans at Bybee Stone Company. They still carve this exquisite Indiana limestone. But the most challenging project in the last 3 years was the design-build assignment for the clock at the Moynihan Train Hall, which we won in competition in the dark days of the lockdown. The idea for a clock was a last-minute addition by the governor. By the time the clock was constructed, the building was fully enclosed. The delivery of this 12-foot tall, 3,800-pound object was a bit tricky, but it's been popular. They actually had to build a gantry and lower it down. This piece was actually built by Hyde Park Moldings, which I think many of you know, and the clock by AmeriClock. This was a competition, and we were up against some big name, famous international architects. But one of the jury members in Albany said that there were some really brilliant ideas from the other architecture firms, but they might have had to require drug testing. Some of them were so far out. And the state agency said there have been a few marriage proposals under the clock, and so far no drug deals that we know of. So on to a few projects from the book. For each one, there's a team, both within my office and outside, the interior designers, the landscape architects, and other technical people who some of you may be in the room. This is a project that we did with JHPA, Richard Piper, and they were in charge of the actual restoration. So everything you see here, this cupola is new, all the copper is new, and they guided us through having custom stamped dies to create all these profiles. When it was delivered to our client who bought it as a condominium, it was represented as having been fully restored. That was a condition the city put on the conversion of the CFO from commercial to residential. But lo and behold, somehow the developer never got around to doing it, and we discovered that it was in dire shape. And it's really been put back into perfect shape, and it should last another 100 years. Below the cupola, we were tasked with the complete reconfiguration and combination of 2 apartments. This was one of those special projects where a client also hired my wife, Katie. Here's the new library. You see Katie's brilliant colors, and she did approve of my niche for the sofa. I like to bring curves into our work, even if it's just the shallow, round molding on the square room. And by the way, a square room is an unusual thing in Manhattan. Much of the rest of the floor is, unlike a lot of my work, it's essentially an open plan, a loft. The curved wall sits directly below the cupola. The living room flows into the dining area and beyond, out of the frame to the left, and to another terrace. All the walls are paneled in rift-cut white oak. The fireplace, courtesy of the developer, comes up awkwardly on the window wall, so we clad it in wavy cast mirror. And Katie found this expressionist portrait by Robert De Niro Sr., yes, the actor's father. Curved walls are a challenge for any interior designer, so it's hard to hang a painting on a curved wall. But Katie and I were at the Winter Antique Show and spotted these 19th century carved birds which float on the curved panel. This is an example of an architect and an interior designer working well together, which is usually, but not always, the case. The ceiling is divided into radial shapes, one of which is punched out for the new stair. In fact, everything you see in these slides is new. Initially, I recommended a stock kit-apart stair made by a company called Duvenage. They're very reasonable and clean-lined, but our client was disappointed and asked, in her words, for one of your special stairs. So we designed the solid bronze spiral with a guilloche pattern railing. LMC, the incredible firm that made it, is so impressive. And we were amazed by this, what turned out to be in the client's eyes, the most important work of art and craft in the apartment. At the lower part of the slide, you see the mantelpiece, which is a Belection molding cast in glass to our design and gilded on the back. Sometimes these small parts of a project really bring great pleasure to the client and complete the vision. This is the room on top. So you go up that stair in your room, an unusual room in New York because it has the dome is lit from windows that are tucked behind the cove molding. And then it has four sets of 3 oval windows which face the city at diagonal angles. It's quite a dynamic room. Next, I'll show you a few images of houses from the book. This house is in a bucolic neighborhood not far from Cleveland. It feels like Connecticut in the days before it got developed along the 95 corridor. It really is still full of horse farms, and it's extraordinary. The landscape architect here was Ed Hollander, who I think may be hiding somewhere in the audience. The exterior design is inspired by the arts and craft architecture of C.F.A. Voisey, Edwin Lutyens, and more specifically, Harry T. Lindeberg, an architect Anne and I wrote about. This is one of the great pleasures of researching architectural practices, that they set the bar very high, and they also inspire thought and challenge. This project was a close collaboration with Miles Redd and his partner, David Kaihoy. The client wanted full-blown classical interiors, and Miles isn't shy about going the distance, even adding Roman senators to hallway in suburban Ohio. This house is shallow in plan, allowing many of the rooms to have light from both sides. The entrance hall aligns with vaulted hallways that join the bedroom wing and the kitchen end of the house. You can walk through from one end of the house to the other without turning. The console brackets at the top of the slides support the main hall, where it crosses between the double height volumes of the gallery and the living room, almost like a bridge. The 20-foot high living room allowed us to have very robust moldings. All our moldings are scaled to the spaces, including this large cornice. The entry is extended with an overdoor and balcony to the hall on the second floor. Miles made most of the tall taxi cab yellow walls with brackets and a collection of porcelain. Our client picked up the Peacock at Creel and Gow on 70th Street, a bit too big for taking home as carry-on, apparently. And we have also internal windows, which you see at the top of the slide, adding to the enjoyment of the space from the second floor. The stair occupies its own room next to the entrance gallery. So it's a bit of a surprise. We designed the railing with Chinese Chippendale style in mind, which worked well with the lantern, the porcelain, and the other elements in the decoration. The double window pours light through this end of the house, reaching the back of the room facing the pond. At one end of the kitchen, we created a bay window for the breakfast table, which is flanked by china cabinets with Chinese Chippendale grills. The flooring pattern from the marble front gallery, which include cabochon, is repeated here, but in cork, which is a very inexpensive and beautiful material. Between the public rooms of the house and the master bedroom, we set this conservatory room with its 3 large arched French doors. Here the flooring pattern is repeated, but in painted wood. The plants, the Italian wallpaper, and the abundant light make it feel like a true indoor-outdoor room, and it's an especially interesting connection to the master bedroom. Back to the East Coast, and another project with Ed. This is what I call the large house problem. This is a very large place with a big program near the water in East Hampton. We wanted the house to unfold gradually so as not to present the full facade to the entrance. So this is all you see when you enter. Many architects understandably don't want trees obscuring their work, but I like trees, they're good. Building this close to this beautiful existing tree was a challenge and essential so that the house would belong to the land from day one. Working with Hollander Design and our engineers, we were able to structure the foundation to completely spare the tree. From some windows in the house, from above, you feel like you're looking at the water, but you're actually in a tree house. Another approach to bringing down the scale of a larger house is by stepping down the massing. At the left, you see the edge of a gable in the main block of the house. In the middle, the conical roof of the small back stair, and to the right, it steps further down to the garage. As in the Ohio house, we placed the stair in its own hall adjacent to the double-height entry gallery. At the top right of the slide, you can see that there's an opening. I like to make the procession through a house interesting and have it unfold in stages. Entering this house, your eyes are drawn through to the water, then you turn to the stair hall. The stairs then take you back towards the center of the plan, to the landing where the opening allows you view at the top of that space. This may sound complicated, but in reality it's very easy, and it makes the procession through the house and just running up to your bedroom a pleasure. You experience everything, but in stages instead of having it all in your face when you walk into the house. This was a collaboration with Victoria Hagan. The architecture is pared down compared to the Ohio house. The central spine is marked by a line of arches. Her light palette, actually white, makes the house glow with reflected sunlight. The master bedroom is connected to a sitting room by sliding doors, which allow the room to be used separately, but most of the day they're open, and the light pours in from 3 sides. We made the ceiling in the bedroom taller by carving space from the attic. In a good house, I believe the ceilings must reflect the scale and character of each room. When we started the project, we found the original farm cottage adjacent to an old barn. The wood, the bottom 20 inches of this building was completely rotten and the roof was leaking badly. This proved to be the oldest extant house in Suffolk County. We had it jacked up on beams and moved to a nearby field. We digitally scanned the whole building and everything was disassembled and tagged. The reconstruction was one of our most satisfying projects. It's really a small gem that in the last few, that was just a few years and a few more leaks away from being lost forever. And the town historian was thrilled. He was so excited about it, he helped us get a zoning exception so that we could have 1 additional unit of residence on the lot. We rebuilt the house exactly as we had found it. You can see that the fireplace wall is skewed at this strange 8-degree angle. Robert Stillen, the interior designer, brought a wonderful sense of whimsy and style to the project. No building department would approve a new house with ceilings this low, but we followed the original architecture and every single beam was brought back and positioned where it had been in 1694. We're often challenged to build in remote places. This is a small island off the coast of Maine. All the materials, all the contractors had to ferry out and back. In the project craft, we had our own ferry every day, sometimes in very rough seas, sometimes through ice. To simplify the process, we had the contractor assemble the framed walls and panels in a warehouse on the mainland, and then ship them out. They were put on racks, the racks onto truck, and the truck onto an LC-45. Yes, we had our client buy a landing craft. Normally, prefabrication isn't economical, but in this case, it was the only solution. There had also been 2 houses on this island that had been lost to fire, one in 1926 and one in 68. So we did a special system, a high fog system, so this house will never burn. When we called the local fire department to ask their response time, which Chubb insurance required, the fireman paused and said, "You can count on 24 hours. We're so lucky to have a talented designer as our client, and we love working with artists too. Alexia Lucian was our guiding star here. She wanted the house to blend in with the dark green pines and the rocky shore. We tucked the house into the landscape, and I've heard that some sailors coming up the bay think it's always been there. No cars on this island, and it's tiny, means no driveway. The brilliant landscape architect Fernando Corroncha worked with Alexia to fashion this magical green approach. The house hunkers down, the roof lines include a jerkin-headed gable, and the stairs under a pepper pot dome. Dark brown shingles envelop the whole. Sgraffito panels inspired by McKean White's Ochre Point in Newport flank the window above the front door. Alexia showed us a picture of doors she'd seen in Italy. Our story as we designed the house, and every house should have a story, is that it was commissioned by an imaginative client in the 1890s who was inspired by architecture she had seen on the Grand Tour. The terrazzo floor is made with shards of marble slabs that were left over. We just had them shattered on the site and incorporated in the terrazzo. The main stair sweeps up under the shingled dome. The side of each tread has another Grand Tour motif, a diamond-shaped panel called a diamante. The stair builder made each one with a gentle curve to fit the stringer. Very challenging to execute, and he was justifiably very proud. Instead of having a separate china closet, we lined the hall leading to the breakfast room, which is on the cover of the book, with glass cabinets. One of the cabinets is built in front of a window facing the back porch, an idiosyncratic detail that adds a mysterious note and makes it feel as though the house has grown in design over time. The kitchen has a serving hall. These windows face another bank of windows that give onto a counter on the prep side of the kitchen. The chalkboard is where you'd write down your menu or maybe your grocery list. The glass in all the windows is a mixture of seeded restoration glass and plate glass, and has imperfections that add to the atmosphere. None of it is insulated since the house isn't air conditioned and has indirect ventilation and air controlled in every room. So it's really, I think the ultimate green solution is just not to have air conditioning if you're in a windy place like this. Our instruction for this room, this is the back stair that connects to the back of the kitchen, was that it should feel like the back stair in an old Jesuit boarding school. If you were there, you see that the wainscoting has a kind of lumpy, dusty layer under the varnish. Alexia told us that the wainscoting should look like it had been varnished by a drunk caretaker in the winter. The capitals under the vault banding slide back into the wall, another Roman detail. A totally different mood here. This is a house in New Jersey. This is another house in the book. This is a stone house with board and batten outbuildings. It was set on the site of an old farm that was derelict. The landscape was designed by Miranda Brooks, who had the brilliant idea that the house and garden needed to be defined and bordered, so she added this brick wall for the cutting garden. And yes, it is as well organized and tended as it looks in this picture. Our garden doesn't look quite this spiffy. The house is clad in very dense sandstone. I had the quarry score lines into the surface of each block, some horizontal, some vertical, and diagonals. They are all mixed in a random pattern. The result is that the texture captures the light. The front door itself is not so large, but the enframement and the overdoor expand the scale of the entrance. The oval window is in a small bedroom upstairs that sits just below the cornice, and it makes the door feel like it's almost a pedestal. And John Flower, who I think many of you know, built this house. At the short end of the house, there are two screened porches, one for the library below, and one, and we've never done this before, is a sleeping porch off the master bedroom. Miranda made this lovely allée of pleached trees, which seemed to create an outdoor room for the porches. Her garden designs are wonderful when seen from above. Inside the house, tall arches open to the living room and here the dining room. The cornice, like all our moldings, were designed specifically for the house, with leaves that lap over the cove. You can see this detail in the living room and more if you buy the book. Oak trimmed breakfast room is vaulted, even though it's very open to the kitchen. It holds its own because it has its own ceiling. This happened to be exactly the spot where our clients said they wanted to be able to sit and have breakfast because the views are perfect in the morning. The end wall of the stair is curved, responding to the curves of the landing. And mind you, these curves all happen within a rectangular box. So you get this very idiosyncratic asymmetrical window frame on the left. We like creating, I say they're almost like problems that become a pleasure to solve in simple plans. The cottages are all clad in board and batten. This may not look like our work. It's really part of the farm vernacular locally. We had just designed an exhibit at the Museum of the City of New York on the Colonial Revival style. And that museum mostly is attracting crowds of school kids. School buses line up outside. So I wanted to have an actual door they could touch and see and feel instead of having everything in photographs and feeling like a museum. And we convinced them that we would design this door, but of course the display budget, exhibition budget wouldn't allow it. So I had my client fund the construction of the door, and it cost a little bit more to build it in a way that instead of being tossed in a dumpster the way most museum exhibits are, it could be disassembled, put in a truck, and relocated to New Jersey. I call it interstate recycling. I'm going to show you a couple of projects that aren't in this book, current projects. This is a townhouse in the historic district in the West Village that was in dismal shape. Our couple bought it from an owner who had had it for 3 years and given up. It had been an open crash pad, drug den. There was even a stall shower off the stair landing and a wall shower with no drain. You simply take the Rubbermaid bucket and dump your shower out the window. It was a complete wreck. The brick wall in the back was literally delaminating and falling off. And this is in a very expensive block in the village. The railings were all gone, simply everything taken away, probably salvaged and sold for scrap. This is the most recently completed restoration. We researched the history of the house and found that it had been built by a prominent contractor who'd worked for the Astors and Trinity Church, and Trinity sold them this land. We were also able to find clues about the cast iron and drew these railings on the areaway and stoop. This will soon feel like it's always been there. In the historic district, we don't seek novelty or to jump out as brilliant architects, but we prefer that it simply becomes part of the context of a street that people love. Using fragments of the original moldings as inspiration, we drew new, wider openings and gave the main floor a loft-like feeling. This house has windows on the sidewall, an unusual condition that allowed us to make the west-facing sitting room in the middle of the plan. We did take advantage of having to rebuild the entire back of the house to add more glass, and this leads to a balcony with a spiral stair that goes down to, yes, yet another Ed Hollander garden. And here the garden is, and again, I don't mind having facades blocked by trees. I think the trees are a great thing, both for this house and, it turns out, for the neighbors. Even though my office can produce 3D digital renderings, and we do virtual reality, so we have presentations where our clients put on the headset and do this, and you have to imagine what they're seeing. Watercolor works best for certain kinds of architecture, and we find it works very well for presenting houses to historical review boards. It gives you more of a sense of our intention. This is a new house in Palm Beach, which we completed recently. We were looking at Spanish architecture and to clues from places like Morocco and Turkey. In fact, the tile surrounding the front door and the spandrel on the towers is from Gorban, a company Katie and I visited in Istanbul in 1991. The parapet above the 3-arch windows, which is her studies, conceals a flat roof portion that holds solar panels. A green energy doesn't have to be ugly. You don't have to show off the fact that you're doing this kind of stuff, which is good for the environment. It's there, it fits, and it works. We haven't photographed the house professionally yet, but this gives you a glimpse from the street. The landscape architect George Sanchez planted the edges of the lot with palm trees and abundant jungle foliage. At least that's my technical term for what they plant in Palm Beach. Hugh Henry was the interior designer. The roof of the house has shiny glazed green tiles, and we designed a cornice that's custom cast in terracotta locally. The column capitals were inspired by a Maurice Fatio project, which was in turn inspired by details from the palace at Isfahan. But because we have a 3D printer, I was able to see a full model of the capital before production. The breakfast room is attached to the side of the house and faces a small garden. The entrance of the house is an octagonal hall that organizes the openings to the courtyard, to the kitchen, and to the stair. The doors and blind arches are carved oak, reflecting patterns of Islamic geometry. We've worked with artisans in Morocco and Afghanistan, and it feels good to support people in troubled countries by paying for their excellent skills. In fact, the carver, not of this, but of some other panels in a project in the book, actually they were carved in Kabul, and he came here with his interpreter, Victoria, and gave a talk with me about carving in architecture. This is fun. The stair occupies the tower, and we were able to build this with a very delicate, narrow inner wall. I called it a large Pringle. By having the stair prefabricated in sections, it was actually made in Colombia, and it was very good value. The steel shell was then clad in mesh, which allowed the direct application of plaster. The south-facing window bathes the stair in light much of the day. Another project we're very excited about is the complete reconstruction and addition to a captain's house on Center Island. All the original millwork, the moldings, the corbels, the porches were either missing or had been replaced with something from the lumber yard, something totally inappropriate. We had to start from scratch. This view is the new kitchen entrance. Columns are on the way. The attic of the house was a rabbit warren of small rooms. Because this will serve as an art studio, we were able to create this column screen so that light flows into the spaces from all four directions. At the top is an open oculus that brings light in from the newly built cupola on the roof. Thomas Jane and his partner, William Cullum, are the interior designers. You can see their great sense of color and pattern here. So just to mention, all the details that we drew, that Gregory Gilmartin of our office drew, are not based on historical evidence. And we believe that when dealing with an old decrepit building, it's acceptable to use your imagination and knowledge and care and actually design and not limit yourself to leaving out things that might have been there. One final project that is now in planning and design is the complete restoration and adaptive reuse of this extraordinary Warren and Wetmore 1906 mansion on Fifth Avenue between 67th and 66th Street. The interiors of the house were designed by, well, the whole house was designed by Whitney Warren, especially the interiors. In 1925, Emily Thorne Sloan Vanderbilt White took ownership and introduced three important paneled rooms, including a room that she salvaged from her father's house, one of the great Vanderbilt mansions at 52nd and Fifth Avenue. We were able to prove this by looking at the way the paneling was installed in one of the front rooms. Since 1946, the house served as the Yugoslavian mission to the UN until 1992, when Serbia controlled the property more or less. The communists didn't spend money on much of anything, although we did find an astounding annual liquor bill, which had been approved in Belgrade. So they didn't change anything. When they needed more office space, they simply put two metal desks in Mrs. Vanderbilt's bathroom. They also didn't change the wiring, and they didn't have any safety measures. So there was a catastrophic fire in 2018, and the fire leapt out of the front windows, luckily closer to the top of the building. Superheated the cornice and the stone, which then simply exploded when the firemen came to put it out. So this is a building in absolutely dire shape. And in the inside, it doesn't have code-compliant elevators or stairs. So we're tasked with reinventing the inside to preserve absolutely in their original state all the important rooms while weaving through the systems and then restoring the rest of it. And it has fascinating facades in the middle of the block. It was originally the tallest building on the block. And here's our rendering of what the building will look like when we complete our restoration. As I said, all the rooms on the inside will be restored, but then the core will be changed, and it's just an endlessly interesting project, and some of the folks from Landmarks actually came for a tour recently. We're really lucky to be working on this last remnant of the Gilded Age. And the commission and the community board aid have been really supportive. I mean, when you do something like this, you want to talk to the neighbors, and it's been a great reception. It will also have the most expensive and I think most beautiful wheelchair access in the city. The stone steps to the left retract mechanically into the building, revealing a lift, and you don't need to wait for an attendant. It will just all happen when you press a button. And then when you're up there, the stone steps slide back magically. And the Landmarks is very excited about this. I worry about them inflicting it on other owners who may not want to pony up the cash, but it's a good thing. And it's, in my office, I say we like to be known for beautiful designs, but we also like to be known for caring about program and detail, and even things like not putting an ugly lift on a beautiful old building. This all matters to us as architects, and I think it all matters to us as New Yorkers. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so very much. That was a really wonderful presentation, and you certainly shared the beauty and indeed the philosophy of Peter Pennoyer Architects. And I have to confess, I feel a little envy, and I think those people who live in those gorgeous, gorgeous houses and apartments are very, very fortunate.
Thank you.
So thank you. We will now take some questions both from our online audience and indeed our in-person audience. Okay.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I have to say that last slide and talking about the lift really piqued my curiosity, and I was just curious about, is the lift itself subgrade then when the stairs roll back, or how does that work?
All the mechanics are in a pit below, but the stairs slide back directly on the surface, so they don't go down, they go in. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Where was the building with the cupola that you had shown in the earlier part of your presentation?
That's on Lower Fifth Avenue in the 20s. It's you can see it. They're two well-known cupola. One of them has gilding, and this one is painted white, as the copper would have been original.
East or west side of the street?
It's on the east side of the street. Yes.
I think I saw a hand over here.
A lot of these houses that you showed, were most of them new, built from the ground up?
That's amazing that I didn't mention that. That would have helped to tell you. Yes, most of them are new. So the stone house in New Jersey is new. The house in Maine is new. Yes, it's all new, except the ones that I specifically said were preservation projects.
Yeah, and then the ones with the curving staircases and everything, they were new too.
That's all new.
That's amazing. I mean, it's good to see that they still build like that, you know?
Yeah. Well,
I'm glad to see that, you know?
They build as well, in some cases better than they used to, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to see they still build like that, you know?
That early image you showed of the reading room at the public library that you were proposing reminded me of the old Penn Station, images of the old Penn Station with the coffered ceiling. Was that your inspiration for that room?
We were thinking it should be in some way relating to Carrera and Hastings, but looked like it was subterranean. So yes, but certainly the coffers in the vault were inspired by Penn Station.
Peter, as a layperson, I think the architectural team designs the building, the contractor builds the building, but I hear from you so many references to artisans who are creating custom components for the house. How is that managed? How does that play out?
The contractor still has to manage everything that gets attached to the building, but there is a pool of talented artisans, stone, metal, glass, and they're well known to contractors, and so but they have to run the show.
That's the architectural firm specifies.
Yes, the architectural firm can recommend, and the more the better. We're not beholden to any one source, but the more the better. So we like to work with artisans. The artisans will come into our offices, and if it's a sculptural detail, they will show us a clay model, and we often will build print models in our office to show the artisan.
And you approve the final?
Yes, we have to approve the final artwork, yes.
Hello, I have a question about when you're designing these new residences, are you taking into consideration 80 years, 100 years, 120 years for someone in the position you're in now? Like, is there designing to make these buildings so they can be restored without causing grave damage to them? Does that fall into your scope of thinking?
Yeah, so I'd say that we don't like to take any kind of structural and mechanical shortcuts, which will lead to maintenance or issues. And we actually believe that the best sustainability is building a house or a building that is well-liked enough that if people change their mind about how it's going to be used, it could be used in a different way. So we see many examples of buildings that are being used in a way that wasn't originally intended because the building feels good and it's solid, and that's sustainability.
That follows on nicely with our next question. This is from Trellis, and Trellis is online. Is there a trend with clients to make the homes climate resistant?
I'm not sure. I mean, people want comfort in their houses, and sometimes, yes, there's specifications that there's artwork that humidity be such and such, and but all these systems are getting better and better. So climate resistance is certainly important. And you design for the 150-year storm, not for what's going to happen next week or in 20 years.
Right. Do we have any more questions? Well, in that case, I want to remind you all that Peter's fantastic, gorgeous book will be for sale when we conclude our remarks. And Peter, I want to thank you so much again for really for a wonderful presentation. And really, I think New York, well, I should say United States of America, is so lucky to have Peter Pennoyer Architects and your philosophy of beauty. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And, to say a few concluding words, but I do also want to point out that we're very fortunate this month in that we will have Peter back in 2 weeks to introduce an artisan on the topic of the restoration of the Notre Dame spire. So I do hope you will all come back for that. But here is Victoria Dengel, our Executive Director.
Yes, and Peter, just briefly, thank you. I don't feel the same envy Karen feels. I'm just grateful that your firm exists, that it does such beautiful work, and here we are in New York City where you can conceive the new but restore the old, and what a place to live, and And, I'm personally grateful for that and for your wife Katie's work as well. And we're really so grateful to have you back with us again. It really means a lot to us. So thank you, Peter, and we can't wait to see you in 2 weeks.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, I do want to remind you that here we have this wonderful book, and Peter will now be accompanying me to the front of the room where Amy would be happy to take any book orders and indeed sales. So thank you so much again, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you.